Hello there, so let's take a trip back to a recent event in Osu history, back to the upheaval. That's a dramatic name for a proposed overhaul to the beatmap nomination group and quality assurance team, published a bit over a year ago. It's actually one of the most interesting documents anyone connected to mapping could read, capturing how people felt at an outstandingly low point for the internal BN/QAT system and explaining optimistic plans going forward. Just prior to the upheaval, the tier system was the biggest problem for beatmap nominators. I've detailed this before, but in summary, BNs were split into upper and lower tiers based on their proficiency in a poorly designed test, with the lower tier only being able to give maps their first nominations. This overworked anyone in the upper tier and made anyone in the lower tier feel useless, ultimately leading to less beatmaps being ranked and demotivating everyone involved. That also wasn't helped by the limited recognition BNs got for their work, namely the missing colored name and forum title they had some time earlier. Lack of motivation at the time carried over to the QAT as well. Its members were forced into management roles completely unrelated to the work as a BN that led to their promotion, and they felt like they had little say in how the mapping world turned. Doing something closer to actual quality assurance like in the past would have been preferred, according to those questioned. Overall, both groups were in abysmal states, which is why the upheaval came to be. The upheaval was designed by an uninvolved third party within Osu staff to rekindle the flames of motivation for BNs in the QAT through directly addressing their problems. What changed after the upheaval? Not quite everything that was proposed, but at least the most vital points were addressed. Most notably for BNs, the tier system was scrapped and replaced with probation, which was mainly a way to watch over new BNs and those who made big mistakes before giving them full nominator permissions. Additionally, nominators finally got a return on their investment, earning themselves a profile badge, a forum title, and purple names on the website. Purple's beautiful. On the QAT side, control moved towards self-leadership. This was a bit rough at first, but evened out later as the group eliminated certain management jobs and focused almost solely on dealing with qualified maps. And so with the upheaval, the beatmap nomination scene was given an all-new... hasn't this stuff happened before? History repeats itself as a cliche, but it's more than applicable to how the internal side of mapping's evolved since the beginning, really. Any mapper who's been following the scene for a long time has probably felt this before, but events after the upheaval were first for me to recognize so many similarities to when I first grew invested in mapping. Being a new mapper in 2014, I directly experienced one of the biggest changes in beatmap nominator history, the BAT-QAT split. The beatmap appreciation team at the time, former name for BN, was disconnected from moderation permissions and therefore made more publicly accessible. I became a nominator myself at the end of 2014 with a 3-month trial period similar to the upheaval's probation. If I made bad choices as a nominator during this time, punishment was harsher than it would be otherwise, the purpose being to weed out new nominators who were insufficient for the job. Beatmap nominator ranking was how those punishments were handled. This system gave each BN numerical points for their nominations and subtracted points for when those nominations led to disqualifications. In their trial period, new BNs were given higher negative multipliers for disqualifications. While the upheaval has no mention of it, something akin to BN ranking will be returning in modern times, albeit with punishment only for breaking clear-cut issues. Then, of course, who could forget the colored names? BAT members had the famed Beatmap Appreciation Team title and the classic red username, which were eventually removed and only with the upheaval replaced with purple names. And lastly, there's a quality assurance team, which at the time was invented to upkeep the new qualified map section. Over time, it's turned its focus towards management, but after the upheaval, it's gone more back to its roots, working mainly on disqualification and checking maps. So all that means the mapping ecosystem in 2018 is looping back to how it originally was in 2014. And the further back you investigate, the more recursive it reveals itself to be. Back when I was surveying mappers for the Mapper Influences website, I got some detailed responses, one being from an old mapper who questioned how modern mapping was developed. He told me, in response to something I said, "When you said that it split the BAT and the QAT in 2014, I was really confused. In 2009 or 10, they already did that, but it was a BAT and the MAT. I was a BAT in 2009, a little bit before they introduced the MAT." And then he went on to say it wasn't just a name change. Roles in the early MAT-BAT split have similarities to how mapping worked in 2014. According to this video from Doomsday, who was involved in this early BMAP promotion system, the mapping assistance team functioned like a limited BAT, promoting maps with proto-bubbles, which weren't real things, for the BAT to check later, sort of how new nominators later promoted maps to the qualified section for the QAT to investigate. The MAT also had those slick purple names, exactly like BN's now, but with extra functionality. Modding activity was measured and shown through these shades of purple, and shades of red for the BAT, easily related to 2014's BN rankings. Though really, what's closer to BN ranking was the literal BAT ranking built into the website a long time ago. All that said, things changed from this 2009-2010 era and eventually looped back on itself to some degree in 2014, then again with much closer similarities in 2018. And I find that interesting. The closest thing to actually new for the internal side of mapping is the Quality Assurance Helper system. This is an unofficial way that the QAT and BNs have been working through qualified maps, which I talked about elsewhere briefly. On this Trello board, the QAT and volunteering BNs give each qualified map a final confirmation that there are no unrankable problems. Each new qualified map automatically has its own entry here, and when 2 people check an entry without reporting for disqualification, it's automatically archived. Fancy stuff. With this system in place, you'd imagine there wouldn't be any issues passing through the qualified section. Yet really, do things at Nosu ever work out as intended? Unranking maps, no, not disqualifying, unranking by removing from the ranked maps category should never happen. If it does, there must be a really serious issue, and in the last few months, it seems like people have been hyper aware of these issues in maps just after they pass into the ranked section, leading to those infamous unranks. Specifically, there was this 2B rhythm on hard difficulty, a section of a map with completely messed up slider tail snapping, a single circle misplaced by a fourth of a beat, making it unplayable, and a mania 2B type thing, I don't know what you'd really call this, all occurring within a short period of time. Does this mean the efforts put towards inspecting qualified maps is useless? Is this whole system for nothing? I don't think so. There's occasionally been some pretty glaring stuff pointed out in these checks, which could have led to unranks later. The unusual amount of unranks and problems in qualified maps could instead be linked to the functionality of the new qualified map queue. They are in qualified status for 1 week. They being qualified maps. If a map has no problems, it'll be ranked in a week, yet if it does have problems, it'll be disqualified. Fix the problems, get nominations, and the map is sent back to the qualified section for another week-long wait. That's how it worked for years, up until a few months ago. Mappers on Nosu's dev Discord expressed how disqualifications were avoided even when they would improve a map because they took just too much time. Like, imagine your map is 1 day from being ranked, then you're hit with a DQ, and once you get your map requalified, you're back in line again and you have to wait another 7 days. It can feel like a waste, which is why mappers avoided even beneficial disqualification, and why the new qualification queue accounts for previous wait times. If a map is DQ'd with only 1 day left now, it'll have only 1 day to wait after getting requalified, rather than 7 again. You can then imagine how some issues slip through the cracks and lead to unranks. Mapper changes something accidentally and there's 1 day left in the queue, not enough people look at it to point it out. It's not perfect, but I'd prefer those rare problems to an environment where mappers sidestep disqualification to avoid waiting. It's practically impossible to moderate the qualified section if everyone's attitudes are against it, and this qualified map queue change resolves that issue. So maybe it's easy to blame this change for the recent unranks, but it's also worth noting that the problems that led to these unranks also exist in ranked maps from before the qualified map queue adjustment. Some of these did lead to unranks, yeah, but I'm not talking about just those. There's still some blatant problems in ranked maps that were just discovered too late to be worth fixing, even from back in the day when the QAT scoured each qualified map. The new Quality Assurance Helper thing exists to slightly improve maps, but mainly to avoid these mistakes that we've been continuously repeating since ancient times. That might come as a surprise. Shouldn't quality assurance involve more strict content regulation? I mean, it's not just about fixing blatant unrankables. Opinionated things do lead to DQs, but not in all cases, which leads to a lot of mapping controversy that exists within the community. I was watching this Circle Talk podcast livestream recently, and part of it focused on each OSU player giving their opinion on the rankability of contentious maps.
This is a 6.3 star map, yes. AR6 initially, now it's AR7.5, yes. And this should be ranked. These kind of maps should be ranked.
Yes.
No.
Is diversity an excuse to rank something though?
No, I feel like
diversity is good for a game.
Yeah, but
I feel like this map was not rankable, not because of the approach rate. No, nothing to do with the approach rate.
Most of the conversation was about the approach rate.
Yeah,
by the end, the consensus seemed to be what you would expect. Nobody could agree. Everyone wanted different things out of the ranked maps section, and that's why quality assurance is kind of as loose as it is. Even within the mapping bubble, there are a few universal agreements, so out there maps aren't strictly rejected based on the opinions of the QAT. And in one way or another, that's how it's always been. For as long as I can remember, people have argued in circles about what deserves to be ranked, just as there have always been blatant unrankable issues reaching the ranked section, and how the BN system has tripled back on its own developments. We've been through this before, yet it'll still keep coming no matter what. Anyway, I feel like we're getting off track. For beatmap nominator systems, why has the past been repeating itself? One theory is to avoid stagnation. We work under one system, then after a long period of time, that system starts to feel ineffective, so we switch to something else, and at some point, there's no practical alternatives to try that haven't been done before. Change feels good when the current system feels bad, even if that change was attempted in the past as well. Developments in this area just go to show how there's no perfectly functional system, which might be hard for new people who haven't experienced this repetition to understand. As for post-upheaval changes, repeating those of 2014 specifically, I think there could be a little bit more to it though. Simply put, this wasn't supposed to last so long. The BAT-QAT split was done to manually trial how Modding v2 nominator systems would work, yet it took 3 years for Modding v2's base to go live with no sign of the nominator systems coming soon. This manual trial was only supposed to be temporary, and so choices were made to reflect that. However, it's turned into a more permanent thing because of the wait. I like to think of this as something like a temporary living situation that lasted too long. You pack your belongings, put them in storage, then sleep on someone's couch for a few days, except a few days turns into a few years because your new home is never ready, so you end up unpacking and moving back into your old one. Colored usernames are the perfect example here. These aren't going to exist in the projected Modding v2 nominator system, so they were removed on the forums, yet years later there still was no Modding v2, and so to please the people stuck in this limbo, the color came back. The better color. Main point here, the ways mapping change behind the scenes over long stretches of time is interesting to think about. Maybe not so much for average Osu players who just want to watch how circles are arranged, but it's engaging for those closely involved with mapping. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed these widely scattered thoughts on mapping's development no matter which camp you belong to. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week. Likely in the form of an interview.